Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on the most disturbing horror books ever written. The Troop Nick Cutter's 2014 debut is the polite entry point on this list. The one where you think, okay, I can handle this. Worms. Just worms. It's fine. It is not fine. The setup is straightforward. Five Boy Scouts and their scoutmaster, Dr. Tim Riggs, spend a weekend camping on Falstaff Island, a remote piece of land off the coast of Prince Edward Island. On their first night, a stranger washes ashore. The man is skeletal, ravenous, and wrong in a way that takes Scoutmaster Tim a few catastrophically stupid decisions to fully appreciate. He invites the stranger in, he feeds him. He then attempts field surgery on a secluded island without proper equipment, which goes about as well as you'd expect from a general practitioner who skipped the part of medical school labeled when not to cut someone open. The stranger is Thomas Paget, patient zero for a bioengineered tapeworm developed by Dr. Clive Edgerton, a scientist who wanted to create a weight loss product and instead created something the military found more interesting. The worm consumes its host from the inside at a speed that is, medically speaking, not survivable. Hosts eat everything within reach: algae, sand, their own hair, dead worms. The worm itself doesn't distinguish between edible and non-edible because it doesn't care. It feeds on eyeball fluid and tooth enamel with complete indifference to your feelings about this. Tim dies under a collapsed tree before the situation fully spirals. What's left is five teenage boys, one of whom is a diagnosed sociopath named Shelley, on an island surrounded by military boats that are absolutely not coming to help. Shelley tortures a kitten and a turtle. I'm mentioning this now so you cannot say you weren't warned. The structure is borrowed from Carrie. News clippings, lab logs, and court documents are woven throughout, confirming early on that there will be exactly one survivor. The book refuses to tell you which one for a long time. This was Nick Cutter's first horror novel. He won the inaugural James Herbert Award for it. Stephen King blurbed it. The blurb says, "Old school horror at its best." He is correct, and he has very clearly read this book, and he is fine about it. Good for him. Next up is Pen Pal, and it starts with a balloon. Dathan Auerbach's 2012 novel started as a series of posts on Reddit's r/nosleep in 2011 under the username 1000 Vultures. It went viral. People made fan illustrations, audio recordings, and short films. Auerbach ran a Kickstarter to get it published as a novel. The community funded it immediately, which tells you everything about what kind of story this is and what kind of people read horror on the internet at 2 in the morning. The premise is simple and absolutely ruins the concept of a happy childhood. An unnamed narrator, an adult, begins reconstructing fragments of his early life. A kindergarten pen pal project, balloon launches, summers in the woods with his best friend Josh, innocent stuff. The kind of childhood memories you keep because they felt safe. They were not safe. Piece by piece, the narrator realizes that someone received his balloon letter in kindergarten, became fixated on a 5-year-old, and never stopped. The stalker photographed him sleeping, carried him into the woods at night, and left him there. When the narrator woke up in the woods once as a child with no memory of how he got there, that was not a sleepwalking episode. When his neighbor, Mrs. Maggie, cheerfully told him her long-dead husband, Tom, had come home, the man in her house was not Tom. The hazmat crews that cleaned out her home afterward removed bags that smelled bad because the stalker had been living there, and Mrs. Maggie had been kind to Dathan, and that was enough. The stalker kills Dathan's cat, kills his girlfriend Veronica with a car, abducts his best friend Josh, who resembled Dathan closely enough to fool a man who had spent over a decade memorizing one specific face. Josh was buried alive. The stalker died, believing he had Dathan. He did not have Dathan. The narrator's mother knew something was wrong for years. She said nothing to protect him from the knowledge. The stalker is never named, never clearly described, never explained. Here is the thing about Pen Pal that makes it worse than most horror novels with twice the body count. You grew up too. You had a childhood. You had a best friend. You played outside after dark. And the book's central question, the one it never answers, is simply, how sure are you exactly that no one was watching? Moving on to The Ruins, which does for Mexican vacations what this book does for balloon crafts. Scott Smith's 2006 novel has no chapters, no cutaways, no scene breaks where the tension resets. Stephen King called it a long scream of horror, which is accurate, and also the kind of blurb that should function as a medical warning. 4 American tourists are vacationing in Mexico. They meet a German tourist named Matthias, whose brother followed an an archaeologist to a remote dig site and hasn't been heard from. The group decides to help find him. They bring minimal supplies and a significant amount of tequila because they are exactly who you think they are. The dig site is a vine-covered hill in the Yucatan. The Mayan villagers surrounding it refuse to let anyone leave, armed and watching. They have salted the earth around the hill to prevent the vine from spreading. This is the most important detail in the novel. The Mayans are not the threat. The Mayans are the only reason this vine has not already consumed everything. The vine is sentient, carnivorous, and patient. It infiltrates wounds and grows inside bodies. Eric becomes convinced it has gotten inside him and begins cutting himself open to extract it. He is correct. Jeff performs a field amputation of Pablo's broken legs using a knife. Amy is suffocated overnight while the others assume she is vomiting from alcohol. Her body is consumed by morning. The sleeping bag moves. It mimics her voice. There is no rescue. The vine does not tire. It simply grows toward nutrients. And unfortunately, you are nutrients. The funniest part is that every single warning sign was ignored. This hill has been there the whole time. It would have stayed there forever if this group had made one different decision at a resort bar. Next up is Gone to See the Riverman. Christopher Triana's 2020 novella opens with a woman writing love letters to a convicted serial killer who butchered over 20 women. This is the most normal thing that happens in it. Lori is a true crime obsessive whose correspondence with Edmund Cox has evolved in her mind into something romantic. Edmund has a task for her, which she accepts without hesitation because her judgment is exactly what you'd expect. She must travel to his cabin in the woods of Killen, retrieve a hidden key, and deliver it to a figure known only as the Riverman. She brings her sister Abby, who sustained a traumatic brain injury and now functions with the mental capacity of a young child. Bringing Abby is the second worst decision Lori makes in this book. The trip excavates Lori's backstory through flashbacks involving sexual abuse, a younger brother named Pete, and an incident that reframes everything you thought you understood about her. The key itself is hidden somewhere, requiring physical retrieval that is revolting by any standard. Lori does it without much hesitation, and that is when the book's real thesis becomes clear. The horror is not the Riverman, a cosmic entity existing somewhere between folk legend and genuine supernatural evil who needs human suffering as strings for his guitar. The concept is inspired by Nick Drake's 1969 song of the same name. The Riverman is almost beside the point. The horror is Lori. Her depravity unfolds incrementally across 170 pages, and what reads as comparatively troubled on page 1 is something else entirely by the final chapter. She is a bad sister, a bad person, and a voluntary participant in her own descent into hell in exchange for a serial killer's attention. Up next is Blood Meridian, where the darkness is the entire American frontier. Cormac McCarthy's 1985 novel is not traditionally shelved as horror. It is shelved as American literature, which is a more disturbing category when you think about it. The kid is a nameless Tennessee teenager who drifts into the American Southwest in the 1840s and falls in with the Glanton Gang, a historical group of scalp hunters hired by the Mexican government to massacre Apache people for bounty. The violence escalates from paid scalping to indiscriminate slaughter of women, children, and livestock, and then past that into territory that has no professional justification whatsoever. McCarthy based this on real historical records. The Glanton Gang existed. This happened. The gang's de facto leader is Judge Holden. He is enormous, hairless, pale, and has never been seen to sleep. He speaks multiple languages, practices chemistry and paleontology, plays the fiddle beautifully, and dances. Every town the gang passes through, a child goes missing. Harold Bloom called him the most frightening figure in all of American literature. The judge's philosophy is internally consistent and fully articulated. War is not a human failing. War is God. Violence is the organizing principle of existence, and anyone who refused to commit to it completely is simply lying to themselves about what the world is. The kid is the one person in the novel who performs occasional small acts of mercy. He is the closest thing to a moral center the book offers. The judge identifies this in him early, considers it a flaw, and waits decades to correct it. He finds the kid at a frontier dance and kills him in an outhouse. The prose throughout is biblical. McCarthy writes mass atrocity with the cadence of scripture, which means the violence is simultaneously repulsive and gorgeous, which means you feel implicated in reading it, which is almost certainly the point. Harold Bloom failed to finish it twice before succeeding. He later called it one of the greatest American novels ever written. Both statements are completely understandable. Next up is Tender is the Flesh, which relocates the philosophical problem of human violence to a grocery store near you. Agustina Basterricha's Argentine novel, originally published in 2017 and translated into English in 2020, Colony poses a simple premise. A virus makes all animal meat toxic to humans. The world must adapt. Nobody seriously considers vegetables. Instead, under pressure from the meat industry, humans bred for consumption are called heads or special meat. They are legally stripped of personhood. They are not permitted to speak. The processing plants, the cuts, the grading systems, all of it is identical to what already exists, just with a different animal at the center of it. The original Argentine title is Cadaver Exquisito. It won the Clarín Novel Prize. It has been translated into over 20 languages. Basterica's goal, in her own words, was more than making audiences squirm. Marcos Teo manages one of these plants. His infant son is dead. His wife has left. His father has dementia. He is a man who has learned to function within horror by not looking directly at it. Then a colleague gifts him a first special, a top-grade female specimen intended for his use before slaughter. Marcos names her Jasmine. He develops feelings. She becomes pregnant with his child. The novel ends with Marcos killing Jasmine by snapping her neck to keep the baby. He does not hesitate for long. This is the horror, not the cannibalism, which the book renders in clinical, bureaucratic prose that is specifically designed to make it feel mundane. The horror is the gradual, nearly invisible process by which a person stops seeing another person as a person. Marcos never becomes a monster. He becomes something quieter and more recognizable than that. Several readers have reportedly become permanent vegetarians after finishing it. This is either a coincidence or the most effective piece of agricultural commentary in contemporary fiction. Up next is Womb, which takes place in a single motel room and somehow manages to be worse than everything we've covered so far. Duncan Ralston's 2017 novella comes with a content warning on the cover that states most readers will find it offensive. This is the only book on this list that tells you exactly what you are walking into. You are here anyway. I respect that about you. Angel checks into room 6 of the lonely motel. He has a speech impediment that makes room sound like womb, which is relevant because room 6 is not just a room to him. His mother died there. The place has structured his entire psychological existence. He hires an escort named Shyla, pays for her time, and asks for something unusual. Not sex, stories. He wants to tell her everything that has ever happened in room 6, in order from least to worst. The structure is deliberate. Each chapter is more extreme than the last. Ralston builds this escalation architecturally so that what disturbs you in chapter 2 becomes the baseline by chapter 5. The stories involve drug smuggling with bodily cavity logistics that will rearrange your relationship with the phrase internal transport, graphic self-mutilation, suicide, sexual acts involving physical harm described in clinical, unsparing detail. The horror never cuts away. There is no tasteful ellipsis. You are present for all of it. The novella builds toward Angel's climax both narratively and literally, which involves him inserting his head into Shyla's body cavity in a scene that functions simultaneously as body horror and metaphor for psychological rebirth. The title earns its meaning. It is either profound or profoundly deranged, and Ralston has clearly thought about which one he wants it to be. Jack Ketchum endorsed it. It has spawned 2 sequels. It is frequently cited as the litmus test for whether someone can handle extreme horror. It made several readers physically ill. The author has stated it disturbed him to write it. That last detail should comfort exactly nobody. Moving on to The Girl Next Door, which has no supernatural elements and no way to dismiss it as fiction. Jack Ketchum's 1989 novel is loosely based on the real murder of Sylvia Likens, a 16-year-old girl who was tortured and killed in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1965 by Gertrude Banishevsky and a rotating cast of neighborhood children. Ketchum changed the names. He did not tone it down. In several respects, the fictional version is more extreme than what actually happened, which is a sentence that takes a moment to process. The story is narrated in flashback by David Moran, who was 12 years old the summer it happened. 2 sisters, Meg and Susan, move in with their Aunt Ruth after their parents die in a car accident. Ruth is a single alcoholic mother who has built her social standing among the neighborhood children by letting them run wild in her house, drink beer, and behave without consequence. She is everyone's favorite adult, which is the most important detail in the novel. The abuse begins small and escalates across months. Ruth recruits the neighborhood children incrementally, normalizing each new cruelty before introducing the next. The abuse becomes encyclopedic: imprisonment, starvation, sexual assault, branding, mutilation. Ketchum does not look away from any of it. Neither does David, who watches, understands that it is wrong, and finds reasons not to act until it is too late to matter. Rue Morgue called it one of the most disturbing reads in the history of horror literature. Stephen King wrote the preface to the special edition. edition. The 2007 film adaptation prompted King to call it the first authentically shocking American film he had seen in over 20 years. The horror here is not Ruth. Ruth is a sadist, and sadists are at least comprehensible as a category. The horror is David. The horror is the other children. The horror is every adult on that street who noticed something was wrong and decided it was not their business. Suburban normalcy as collective moral failure is not a horror trope. It is a documented historical event with a specific address. Sylvia Likens died on October 26, 1965. There is no catharsis in this novel. There is no monster to defeat. There are only ordinary people who made ordinary choices, and a girl who needed one of them to make a different one. Next up is American Psycho, where the monster wears a better suit. Bret Easton Ellis's 1991 novel was dropped by its original publisher Simon & Schuster before it ever reached shelves. Employees had leaked the manuscript to feminist organizations who objected to its content. Vintage picked it up. It has since been translated into 27 languages and is currently shrink-wrapped in Queensland, Australia, where it can only be sold to adults over 18. This is the kind of publication history that tells you something important. Patrick Bateman is 26, works on Wall Street, and documents his life in obsessive detail. Designer brands, restaurant reservations, morning skincare routines, murders. The prose treats all of these with identical tonal flatness, which is the novel's central horror mechanism. A chapter detailing the complete discography and cultural significance of Huey Lewis and the News is followed immediately by a torture sequence described in the same consumer catalog register. No transition, no acknowledgement that a register shift has occurred. Ellis gives you no permission to feel that one of these things is different from the other. The violence escalates from a homeless man and his dog to elaborate extended acts of mutilation involving power tools, rats, and other implements described with the same precision Bateman applies to identifying a competitor's business card stock. His murders may or may not be real. The novel never resolves this. Bateman confesses to his lawyer over dinner, who assumes he is joking and mentions that Paul Owen, whom Bateman believes he dismembered, was recently seen in London. Bateman leaves bodies in his apartment. He calls a lawyer's answering machine to confess everything. Nobody investigates, nobody cares. This is the point. Bateman is surrounded by people exactly as hollow as he is, just with less murder. He desperately wants to be caught, and the world finds him entirely unremarkable, which means either the murders are fantasy produced by a disintegrating mind, or they are real, and the social fabric of 1980s Manhattan is simply too self-absorbed to notice a serial killer operating in plain sight. Both readings are disturbing. Ellis has never clarified which one is correct. I assume this is intentional, and I find it extremely irritating. In conclusion, we saved the oldest entry on this list for last, because the Marquis de Sade did not believe in easing anyone into anything. The Marquis de Sade wrote this on a 12-meter scroll of paper while imprisoned in the Bastille in 1785. When the Bastille was stormed in 1789, the manuscript disappeared. Sade reportedly wept tears of blood over its loss. It was eventually recovered, passed through private hands for over a century, and was not published until 1904. The word sadism is derived from his name. These facts are all connected. 4 wealthy libertines seal themselves in the Chateau de Sealing, a remote castle in the Black Forest, with 46 victims consisting mostly of adolescents, 12 accomplices, and 4 aging prostitutes. The libertines represent France's power structures precisely: nobility, clergy, law, and finance. This is not subtle. The prostitutes narrate 600 categorized sexual acts called passions, organized across 4 escalating stages: simple passions, complex passions, criminal passions, murderous passions. The libertines act out each one as it is narrated. The categories include coprophilia, necrophilia, bestiality, incest, rape, and the sexual torture and murder of children. The book is unfinished. Only part 1 is fully drafted. Parts 2 through 4 exist as detailed notes, which is both a literary fact and, depending on your perspective, either a tragedy or a significant mercy. There is no narrative tension, no character development, no redemption arc. It reads like a bureaucratic index of atrocity, which is precisely what makes it the terminus of this list. Every other book here has a story. This is a catalog. The horror is systematic and exhaustive, organized by category, escalating by design, with the same administrative efficiency as a government document. Simone de Beauvoir wrote the introduction to the Grove Press edition, titled Must We Burn Sade? André Breton championed him. Guillaume Apollinaire praised him. Pier Paolo Pasolini transposed the entire structure to Mussolini's Italy for his 1975 film Salo, which is itself among the most controversial films ever made. Serious intellectuals have spent considerable energy arguing that this work contains philosophical merit. They are not entirely wrong, and that is perhaps the strangest horror of all. Sade called it the most impure tale that has ever been told since our world began. He was not exaggerating. In conclusion, horror literature is a vast and varied art form capable of psychological devastation, existential dread, and total sensory assault, and you should absolutely read it. If you enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation, I made others, and you should absolutely check them out. Peace on planet Earth.